This video I'm about to do is going to be mega informative, mega educational, and most importantly, mega fun. Hey, I'm Emma. At 240, we help teachers pass their certification exams, and today we're going to help you. This video is going to prepare you for Subtest 2 of the Mega Elementary Education Multi-Content Exam. MEGA stands for Missouri Educator Gateway Assessment, and that's test code 074. Now, the Mega Elementary Education Multi-Content Exam is split into two subtests. Subtest 1 covers mathematics and science, and Subtest 2 includes English Language Arts and Social Studies. Each contains approximately 80 multiple choice questions, but in this video, we're only going to focus on Subtest 2. And we're going to cover three things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that will be on the test, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. Let's get to it. Again, the Mega Elementary Education Multi-Subject Subtest 2 is made up of two domains: Reading and English Language Arts and Social Studies. Reading and English Language Arts makes up a larger portion of the test at 60%, and Social Studies makes up 40%. Each of these two domains has competencies under it that provide more information about the questions you'll be asked. But let me show you something. Reading through a competency is not as helpful as you'd like it to be. It's like fine print here. But guess what? That's exactly why I'm here. I want to point out the highlights and make this as simple as possible for you. So get ready, because we're going to go over a key concept from each competency. Let's start with the bigger chunk of this subtest, the Reading and Language Arts domain. The first competency in this domain is Foundations of Language and Literacy Development. Now, this competency covers how young students build oral language skills, as well as literacy skills. What kind of literacy skills? I'm so glad you asked. I'm talking about things young students need to know to be able to read, such as phonological awareness, concepts of print, the alphabetic principle, phonics, high-frequency words, fluency, and morphology. Got all that? Good, let's move on. Just kidding. I know that's a lot. And while we don't have time to go through it all now, we have it all covered for you to study at your own pace in our study guide. The link is below. But right now, we must go over a must-know for this competency. It's a must-do. Let's talk about phonological and phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is essentially a subcategory of phonological awareness. Phonological awareness encompasses the ability to recognize individual phonemes, syllables, and words. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and use individual units of sounds, or phonemes. Phonological and phonemic awareness are strong predictors of early reading success. Students need explicit, direct instruction to develop these skills. So let's say you ask students what word they make when they blend together w, I, n. You are helping them develop phonemic awareness skills by facilitating phoneme blending. And that's a win. Once students have learned to read, they'll start reading to learn, which brings us to our next competency. This one is all about vocabulary development and text comprehension. Vocabulary development refers to students' ability to effectively know and use words in their listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Effective vocabulary development promotes comprehension and overall reading success. Often, vocabulary is learned indirectly through authentic language experiences, but sometimes you need to teach new words directly. Let's take a peek inside our study guide to hear about a couple of strategies for doing just that.
Even though many words are learned indirectly, some vocabulary words, especially those academic in nature, must be taught directly. Strategies that can enhance students' direct vocabulary development include: pre-teach unfamiliar vocabulary before having students read a text. Focus on words that support the big ideas. This method can improve comprehension of the text while providing the opportunity to learn new words. Provide ways to actively engage students with new vocabulary. This engagement might include a graphic organizer, such as a simple concept map. The Freyer model, shown here, provides 4 standard boxes around the vocabulary term.
Those were some great tips, and we have even more for you in our study guide. All right, let's keep rolling. In the Comprehension, Interpretation, and Analysis competency, you'll be asked about teaching these skills to students, as well as demonstrating them yourself. This means some questions will be passage-based, so you'll read a passage and then answer a question about it. And to tackle passage-based questions, it's super important to identify the main idea and primary purpose of the selection. These are two key takeaways that will help your understanding of the text. Let's hear more. A main idea is the central point of the passage. It might be clearly stated, or you might need to infer it. A primary purpose is why the author wrote the work. You often have to infer this one. Be prepared to see questions that ask you about main idea or purpose directly, but no matter what, it's an important first step to take. Determining the main idea and primary purpose will help you fully analyze the text and prepare you to answer other types of questions about it. If you want even more helpful tips about this skill and all the others you'll need for your exam, get yourself the 240 Study Guide. It's aligned to the exam standards and is full of instructional materials, including flashcards and videos. It even includes a full-length practice test. The link is below when you're ready, but right now, let's move on to our next competency. It's the last one of the Reading and English Language Arts domain, and it covers written and oral communication. Expect to see questions about helping students develop their listening, speaking, and writing skills. A super important aspect of this is knowing how to identify credible sources. These are sources that can be trusted, meaning the information presented in them can be backed up with evidence. To determine whether or not a source is credible, ask yourself, who, what, where, and when? Who wrote it? Determine whether or not the author has a known agenda or bias. What are the key claims? Make sure there's evidence provided to support them. Where was the source published? Credible sources are typically from well-known, reputable publications, like news sites you recognize. When was it written? The information could potentially be outdated by more current research. Once credible sources are identified, students also need to be taught how to properly use and cite them in their own work, including writing and presentations. Okay, let's make a move from language arts to social studies. There are 3 competencies in this domain, and in each one, you can expect to see questions that cover both content and pedagogical knowledge and skills. So that's what you'll be teaching and how to teach it. In fact, all of these social studies competencies have standards that focus on planning units and lessons in that subject area that provide authentic or real-world learning experiences, teaching vocabulary related to the content or topic, assessing students in that content, and evaluating and addressing student misconceptions. So this domain has quite a lot of pedagogy. Now let's dive into the content, starting with the first competency, government. Government questions will primarily focus on founding U.S. documents and principles, like the Constitution and federalism, structures of federal, state, and local governments, national symbols, like the national anthem, and core U.S. values, like peaceful protest and civic duties. Don't worry if some of that seems a bit out of your wheelhouse. We have tons of great resources in our guide to help train your focus. Check this out. This cool chart explains the concept of checks and balances in the U.S. federal government. This is a core principle of our government, and it will definitely come up on your exam. Keep in mind that many of the social studies questions will ask about content in the context of instruction. So you might see a sample unit about U.S. federal government structure and get asked what resources would be most appropriate to include in the unit. You'll need to know the content to be able to choose the most relevant resources. You'll also need to identify the pedagogical principles behind choosing resources and make sure it's developmentally appropriate. Phew, that's a lot, but you can do it, especially with the 240 Study Guide up your sleeve. All right, let's keep moving. Competency 13 is all about Missouri and U.S. history. Questions in this competency will focus on historical inquiry. So in addition to historical knowledge, you'll also be teaching research methods. So you're likely to see many questions that ask you to read a passage from a primary or secondary source. You'll need to be able to analyze the text yourself and help your students analyze it for themselves. Stick around for the end of the video, and I'll go over a sample question to show you what this might actually look like on the exam. For history knowledge, you're likely to see questions related to causes of the American Revolution, causes and effects of westward expansion and manifest destiny, causes of the U.S. Civil War, including Missouri's role in the war, the Industrial Revolution and Gilded Age, the World Wars, the Depression and New Deal, and the Cold War. Most of the state history will focus on how those major events impacted Missouri or the state's role in those events. Again, it's important to remember that many of these questions will ask you to analyze text to find main ideas, determine author bias, find evidence to support claims, and more. So being familiar with historical inquiry skills and instructional methods will be super important. Okay, we've arrived at our final competency for social studies. Let's do it. This one is tricky because it's really 3 disciplines rolled into one, including economics, geography, and culture. This competency has the same pedagogy-focused standards as the other 2, so let's focus on the content. The key economic concepts that you'll need to know are scarcity, types of capital and resources, how humans exchange money and goods for other goods or services, and how supply and demand affect prices and incomes. The pedagogy component to this content may ask you to choose the most appropriate simulation or activity within the classroom or school to provide students with a real-world application for these economic concepts. Think school stores, budgeting games, that type of thing. For the geography questions, you should study map skills, like how to read a map, and names of tools like compass rose, legend, and scale. The locations of major rivers, mountain ranges, plains, and other major U.S. geographical regions, and how humans have adapted to and altered these geographical features for their own purposes. That's human geography. Check out this super cool resource in our study guide. It'll help you learn the basics of U.S. geography that you'll need to know for this test. It covers just what you need without going into detail about all the stuff you probably won't be asked about. The last content area for this competency is culture. Culture questions are likely to focus on ways we as a culture preserve traditions through stories, songs, or important works of art, and the economic, historical, and cultural impacts of immigration in the U.S. And again, how to read and interpret graphs and other sources related to the topic will also be vital. So you'll be asked to analyze them yourself and determine the best instructional approaches to teach those skills. We'll have some practice with this in just a minute because it's question time. Let's start back at the beginning with Domain 1, Reading and English Language Arts. And let's take a look at a question about foundations of language and literacy development. Which of the following students is demonstrating phonemic awareness? A student who can identify the number of words in a sentence that is read aloud, a student who can listen to the word sit read aloud and identify that the first sound is s, a student who recognizes that happiness contains 3 syllables, a student who is asked to name a rhyming word for sweep and says heap. B is the correct answer. The feedback feature in the 240 study guide tells us that phonemic awareness is the ability to identify individual sounds in a word, like knowing sit begins with the sound s. All other choices would fall under other parts of the phonological awareness umbrella. For the next one, let's check out what one of those vocabulary questions might look like. Miss Ader reads a book aloud to her students. She introduces unfamiliar words during the reading and wants to promote the students' vocabulary development after the reading. Which of the following activities would best support Miss Ader's goal? Write the unfamiliar words on the board and have students use a dictionary to define the words? Have students draw a picture that illustrates the definition of unfamiliar words? Reward students who use the words in class? Have the students read the story silently and write down any words that are unfamiliar? This is the right answer because it allows the students to think of the word in various contexts and scaffold the word into their existing vocabulary. For your next course, I'll be serving you a reading passage with a side of an interpretation question. Bon appetit! Almost everyone seems to think that we retain in the mind only those things that we can voluntarily recall, that memory, in other words, is limited to the power of voluntary reproduction. This is a profound error. It is an inexcusable error. The daily papers are constantly reporting cases of the lapse and restoration of memory that contain all the elements of underlying truth on this subject. It is plain enough that the memory seems decidedly limited in its scope. This is because our power of voluntary recall is decidedly limited. But it does not follow simply because we are without the power to deliberately recall certain experiences that all mental trace of those experiences is lost to us. With research, we could learn more about how and why people have restored memory that was previously lost. The author implies that C is our best choice. The author implies that scientists will soon be able to help people remember things that they were previously unable to. The research that they encourage in the last sentence implies that they believe people could be helped to access more memories. Ready for a question about the writing process? Oh, what's that you say? You were born ready? I could tell. In order to practice the drafting stage of the writing process, a teacher might ask her students to do which of the following activities: write for 5 minutes about a teacher-designated topic without worrying about structure or grammar; using an existing piece of writing, change the setting of the story to include more dramatic elements; swap essays with a classmate to check for grammatical errors; or generate a list of questions they do not know the answer to but would like to find out about. A is our best choice. Participating in short, low-stakes free writing time would provide students with an opportunity to put pen to paper and practice writing paragraphs, which is in line with what pre-writing is all about. Domain 1, done. Let's keep it moving on to Domain 2. We got a preview earlier of types of information you'll need to know to answer economics questions, but let's take a look at how that competency will come up on the test. Remember how I said a bunch of questions will involve pedagogy concepts? Let's see about that. Which of the following would be the most appropriate activity for teaching basic concepts of personal finance to 5th grade students? Wow, all of these seem like they could be perfectly reasonable. So I'm going to go back to the question to figure out some details. The class is in 5th grade, so I need to think about what would be interesting and appropriate for 5th graders. I also know that the learning objective focuses on the basic concepts of personal finance. So that's budgeting, income versus cost, things like that. So with those in mind, I can rule out A, because capitalism isn't really central to personal finance. B definitely seems like personal finance, so let's keep that one in mind. C is relevant to the objective, except that doesn't sound engaging for 5th grade students who don't have bank accounts. And D definitely seems like important information, but I know that hands-on experience and practice is more beneficial than research to explore data. So for this one, B is correct. Let's see one about history. Remember how I said some of them will include passages from historical documents? Let's take a look. Like some of the ELA questions, this question has a passage and asks you to answer based on text analysis. So the question is asking which research question might be generated by this passage. Interesting, so we need to find not which question is answered by the passage, but which question could someone have after reading this passage. The first sentence tells us something interesting that we might want to know more about, but then the second sentence explains it, so no further questions there. Sentence 3 supports sentence 2 to discuss why he was elected. And sentence 4 seems like an interesting fact about Washington's politics. Let's look at the options. A seems totally off topic. You might wonder that, but there's no information about John Adams included here. Option B was answered in the passage, so that wouldn't be a question to research after reading this excerpt. C might be a natural follow-up. And D was answered in the topic. Washington ran unopposed. Yep, that's the one we want. C would be a natural follow-up question after reading this passage. We know how and why he was elected. How did it go after that? Yikes, these are tough. But here's a tip. Make sure you really read the question carefully and take time to reason through it. That'll help you narrow down choices and utilize all of your knowledge and critical thinking skills. Okay, one more. This one will focus on geography, and again, has that pedagogy flair. Let's check it out. A geography teacher is creating an activity to introduce world religions to their 4th grade class. The activity involves students using colors on a map to illustrate the major religions in each region of the world. Which of the following skills will students need to learn before completing the activity? We know the assignment involves using colors to show regions. That would be done using a legend. The other options would definitely be part of this unit, but the question specifically asks what students will need to know before completing this assignment. So, A is correct. Great work! And that's it. We've practiced a question from every competency in the Mega Elementary Education Multi-Content Subtest 2 exam. Congratulations on finishing the video. If you found it helpful, give it a like. And there's still plenty more to learn. If you really want to make sure that you're prepared for the Mega Elementary Education Subtest 2, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 Study Guide. It has hours of videos, so you can watch or listen while doing chores. It's test-aligned, so you know precisely what you need to study, and has hundreds of practice questions, so you can be sure you're ready. And it has the money-back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.